Okay, is audio all right? Can everybody hear me okay? Just kind of, if you can't, raise your hand. Okay, all good? Okay, excellent. I guess most of you know I'm Wally Moran. I do the Sail to the Sun ICW rally every year. I've done not quite 50 trips on the ICW, and the purpose of this series of webinars that I've been doing for the last month is to acquaint everybody with what the ICW is all about, and to give you an idea of what you need to know to be able to safely and comfortably do the ICW. Clue you in on a couple of the trips, a couple of the tips, a couple of techniques, where the problem areas are, and that sort of thing. Tonight I remembered to record. I remembered to put the recorder on. You'll be able to review this. Oh, by the way, if you just signed in, would you mute your microphone, please? Thank you. Where was it? Yeah, I've remembered to record it this time. So after this webinar, if you didn't catch something, you can I'll come back and get it off of my YouTube channel. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to share page, and we'll start with this one. Today we're going to be discussing from Beaufort, South Carolina through to Florida, the trouble areas and some anchorages and such. Florida we're going to treat rather lightly because it's really not difficult at all. Once you get into Florida, you're past the tough stuff. Okay. Last week when we left off, my apologies for that, folks. That was my mistake. Last week when we left off, we stopped off at Steamboat Creek, which is an anchorage between Charleston, South Carolina, and Beaufort, South Carolina. So leaving from Steamboat Creek and heading towards Beaufort, and that's Beaufort as opposed to Beaufort in North Carolina. As I mentioned, there's several anchorages on the way there, one of them being Steamboat Creek, which is a good one. There used to be a shoal area to the south of Steamboat Creek that ran from Statute Mile 501 at the highway bridge south to Statute Mile 504 at G143. That has been dredged as of last month. I went through there and I saw nothing less than 11 feet at low tide. So there's lots of water there now. That was a real problem area. If it was at low tide, you oftentimes could not get through there. So that's been cleared completely up. As well, the other area that they've dredged was the notorious Ashepoo-Coosaw Cutoff, which is in the picture you see on the right-hand side there. That's now dredged out to 11 or 12 feet mean low water. There is a shoal starting to build already down at the very bottom of it, at the south end of it, where the arrow is pointing. Last report that I heard, it was at 9.9 feet at mean low water, which means it's not going to be a bother for us now. But if you're not going this year, if you're perhaps going next year, that shoal may well have built back in the meantime. So, you know, that's the thing about the ICW. These shoals, they are continually changing. The Ashepoo-Coosaw was dredged a number of years ago, and it just builds back up. It's just a recurring thing that you have to deal with. Okay, so Beaufort, South Carolina. Beaufort, you've got an option of an anchorage. You've got a mooring field. You actually have two anchorages, pardon me. There's one up the creek. Then you have the mooring field, and then you have dockage. You have three different marinas. Two of them are safe harbor marinas. The other one is the Ladies Island Marina. If you're interested in sightseeing, then the marina you want is the downtown marina. Okay, this Beaufort is one of the most beautiful waterfronts and downtowns on the ICW. There are all kinds of pubs and stores, a library, some good restaurants. The day dock is suitable for you to bring your big boat to. So if you wanted to go do some grocery shopping and have an easy time of offloading it, just bring your boat into the day dock and offload right there. Now, the currents here are very, very strong, but the holding is quite good. Now, I have down here that they have a Marina Lona car. That is not the case. The Marina Lona car is no longer since Safe Harbor took them over. There's also an anchorage in Port Royal, but that's not very much used. Now, if you need to do provisioning, I suggest that you go to the Ladies Island Marina, which is before the bridge. When you come to the Ladies Island Bridge, hang a left and get way over close to the bridge, by the way. Don't go in the middle here, because if it's slow ground, you want to go well over to the south side, almost right up next to the bridge, come in around the green, and then run up here till you see the boat ramps and anchor somewhere there. It's about a half a mile walk to a grocery store. There's a hardware store, a couple of good restaurants. but that's the most convenient for any provisioning you have to do in that town. If it's sightseeing you want to see, as I mentioned, the downtown marina is the best for that. Now, when you are leaving Beaufort, your next destination, pardon me, it's probably going to be Hilton Head. So what you want to do is you want to leave on an outgoing tide. And the reason for that is that the current coming in the Port Royal Inlet is very strong, and it'll knock your speed right back down. So catch the outgoing tide on the way out and make your life a lot easier. Oops, okay. There we go. Leaving Beaufort, you're going and heading towards Georgia, you're going to come to something called Fields Cut. This was another problem area, and it is being dredged now as we do this presentation. If you want to see what the hydrographic charts of it looks like, check out Aquamaps. If you don't have Aquamaps, you should consider getting that as a navigation app for your iPad or your tablet or your phone. Really, really quite handy. But anyway, you can hook up the hydrographic maps, and they will show you the actual depths, color coded, so you can see what kind of problems you might be coming up against. There's an anchorage available at the north end of Fields Cut. When you come down through Fields Cut, you're coming to the Savannah River and into Georgia. Very, very strong current, so you want to be sure that you do not get pushed sideways. And as well, you want to be sure when you come up there to watch for big ship traffic. It's like there's a ship every 10 or 15 minutes that comes through there. So you just want to be sure and make sure that the ship's well passed before you try getting out there. There's an actual tide app or tide station for Fields Cut, so you can check the status of the tide at Fields Cut when you come through it. Okay, everybody's heard of Hell Gate. Well, Georgia has its very own Hell Gate. It's not particularly difficult. It's been dredged, although it's starting to shallow out a little bit. The one difference, this particular problem area, is that when you come through, you're not coming through with the current in front of or behind you. You've turned to the right, and the current is going to be on your beam. The trick to getting through here safely is as you go through, look behind your boat every time. Just look behind your boat and make sure that you're not drifting out of the current. Because if the current's strong, you may have to crab your boat. For example, if the current's coming against your starboard side, you may have to turn the boat a bit to starboard and give it a bit more power to get through without being pushed out of the channel. Anyway, it's fairly easy. Just watch the markers, stay in the center. You should see no less than about 8 feet even at low tide here. There's a larger sample on the right. You can see it's quite clear, except for the very, very end when you leave it going south. That was a note somebody sent me a year ago about Hell Gate. He saw 20 foot, about 3 boat lengths off of G89, and then 12 feet a little bit further. And he just mentions about the side current. The tide station for this location is Egg Islands. Okay, so remember that if you want to check the tide state there. Okay, Little Mud River has not been dredged. I don't think it's ever been dredged, and it continues to be a challenge. It's the most problematical stretch of the ICW. But the good news is that 1 hour after low tide, you can carry 5 foot of draft through there. 2 hours after, you can carry 7 feet. 3 hours after, you can put anything through except maybe the Titanic. And remember that there is a small cruise ship that goes through here every couple of weeks that draws 8 feet of water. So if a cruise liner can get through here with 8 feet of water, you certainly can, but it's a matter of just playing the tides. Now, if you come up on Little Mud River and your timing's wrong, you don't want to try because it's late in the day, there are a number of excellent anchorages. The one here at the top at Duplin River, good anchorage, very strong current, so use lots of scope. There's a ferry boat there, so anchor up well past the ferry boat. A little bit further back from here, coming back up to the ICW, I don't have it shown, but there's an anchorage on a place called Creighton River. Very good, very safe anchorage, especially if the winds are out of the north. It would be your best bet rather than Duplin River. You can also anchor off of the ICW in a location like here, or down here, and also over here. And then you can just wait for a state of tide that you're comfortable with. When you come through the Little Mud River, tend to stay a bit to the left of center most of the time. That will keep you in the deepest water. But again, as I said, if you come through any time after about 2 hours after low tide, or 2 hours before low tide, you're going to find at least 7 feet of water, even in the most shallow areas. And the one other thing about this is that when you're coming through, if there's an incoming tide, marker 208 down here at the bottom, give it lots of room because the current will push you back into it if you're not careful. There we go. Okay, here's a little bit more of a close-up of Little Mud River. The tide station for Little Mud River is Wolf Island. And as you can see here, I've marked with the arrows the three most difficult spots, right at the beginning, right here along this curve, and then down here towards the end. Okay, those are where you're going to find the worst of the shallow water. Okay. Now, Jekyll Creek is the last problem area on the entire ICW. Okay, once you're past this, when you're past all of them. This, unfortunately, was dredged and it started to shoal in again. If you draw anything over 5 feet, then you do not want to be going through here at low tide. So, for example, if you draw 6 feet, you're going to want to wait for at least an hour after low tide before you try it. Now, the instructions as they exist currently, heading south, start your turn by marker G19 about 300 feet before reaching it, and pass it 60 feet away from it. Pass R20 by 100 feet to your side, and R20A by 150 feet off. And the channel, according to instructions, is actually a little bit further east than. Now, Jekyll Creek is very sensitive to wind tide. So if you have a strong east wind, it'll increase your depths up to a foot, and a west wind will do the reverse. It will decrease depths by as much as a foot. Typically, though, as I said, this is another area with 8 to 9 foot tides. So if you're at half tide or better, you're not going to have a problem. But the channel, the other thing to remember about this particular spot here, the channel is very narrow. So you don't want to be moving too far off the center of it. Anything even as little as a boat length will get you into trouble in this location. Okay. Now, all of this is a real pain in the ass to try and remember all these little dictums and these little tricks and where to turn where. And you may not have internet access for some reason to be able to look this up. Remember these 3 words: half tide rising. Anywhere in South Carolina, North Carolina, anywhere in Georgia that you're running into trouble with shallow water, if you're at half tide and rising, you're in good shape. Now, should you manage to go aground even at half tide, you still have got 3 to 4 feet of water coming up that will float your boat. Okay. So if you're really, really nervous about any individual location, go through it at half problem. Okay, now, again, if this seems like too much of a nuisance and you don't want to put up with that, although you're going to miss some beautiful, beautiful areas, but if you decide that you'd rather just go offshore and miss all of it, jumping offshore from Port Royal Sound out of Beaufort and running all the way down to St. John's Inlet can save you a considerable amount of time and distance, okay? Now, I've marked the distances on the chart here from one inlet to the other. These do not include the time it takes to get out and to get in. But as you can see, if you jumped out at Port Royal, you could come in, I think that's St. Catharines. It's a 53-mile run. You come out at St. Catharines and do another 35 miles to the next inlet, 27 miles down to, what is it? The inlet at Fernandina Beach, and I can't think of the proper name for it. And then you could run all the way down to St. John's Inlet. Those are the miles between the inlets. The total distance would be 135 nautical miles. So that would be a day's run. You could start off first thing in the morning, jump offshore with a nice wind, sail all the way down to St. John's and come in the St. John's Inlet in the morning. Okay, now, once your last stop in Georgia, don't miss Cumberland Island. Cumberland Island is was the former vacation home of the Rockefellers and a couple of other, the DuPonts, I think, was another family that had mansions there. Really, really fascinating place. You've got armadillos, you got sea turtles, you got wild horses. Really, really gorgeous. The anchorage is quite good. You can ding into shore and go visiting, explore all these old ruins. The part that I found the most fascinating, there was a lineup of about a half a dozen old cars. They'd mostly rusted away to nothing, but you could still see the shape of the cars. You could see the frame, and I just thought, how wealthy do you have to be to leave your vacation home and leave a half a dozen cars on your vacation island and never see them again? But it's just that kind of wealth. It's a beautiful site, very pleasant, very clean, very well maintained. So don't miss Cumberland Island. Now, another spot that's really enjoyable is St. Mary's. Um, when you come into St. Mary's, excuse me, instead of following the ICW, you hang a right and you drive up here where my cursor is going. It's several miles upriver, lots of deep water, very strong current. When you get into St. Mary's proper, you're going to find your chart stops. There is no chart after that wrote down here be dragons. It after the one of the hurricanes a few years ago, all the local transient dockage was wiped out. You had no choice but to anchor. Fortunately, they have now established a new city dock, and there's dockage available there. This is where a lot of people will come for Thanksgiving because St. Mary's has had a tradition going on for many, many years now of putting on the St. Mary's Thanksgiving dinner for cruisers. And there's usually 100 or more cruisers up there and spend Thanksgiving at St. Mary's. It's a really good time, really a lot of fun. They provide a free ride to the grocery store so you can provision. They have all kinds of events going on. I really recommend if you're coming south, try and hit St. Mary's for Thanksgiving, and just watch out for the dragons. Okay, now Florida. The big thing about Florida starts at Statute Mile 714. The ICW technically ends at mile 1095, which is in Miami and Biscayne Bay. The big thing that people get concerned about Florida are the anchoring regulations. Now, for anybody who's followed me for any length of time, you know that I've been involved in the anchoring wars in Florida for, I guess, since 2007. Unfortunately, we're not winning them, but we've made some inroads in some places. It's not as bad as what you might have heard. The way Florida is going now is they're establishing a lot more mooring fields and what they call anchoring limitation areas. And what an anchoring limitation area is, it's a locally governed area where the city or this county stated that you can anchor more than 45 days out of, I think it's usually a 6-month period. And what they're attempting to do is they're attempting to get rid of the derelict boats and the local liveaboards, which is unfortunate because, I mean, a lot of these liveaboards work in these towns. It creates some significant issues. Now it's political, so we're not going to go there. But those are the two things you're going to find now: mooring fields and anchoring limitation areas. In terms of it being an anchoring limitation area, it must be identified with signage. And typically, as I said, you're allowed a 45-day stay maximum. If you're finding that you're going to be staying in one of these anchoring limitation areas, there's one that they're developing in West Palm Beach. There's another one that they're putting out in Melbourne. There's a couple. There's one or two in Jacksonville. If you go down Jacksonville off the ICW, make sure that you have some form of proof of when you arrived, because if the local water cop comes and decides that he doesn't want you there, and usually what happens, these things are located outside of some very wealthy homes, and the local homeowners just don't want anybody in the water there. It's Florida, you know. Once they got their piece of the action, they don't want anybody else to share it. Anyway, make sure that you have some sort of proof of when you arrived in the location, because, you know, if the local law arrives and says, well, you've been here 45 days, you have to leave now, and you say, well, I've only been here 10 days, he'll just say you prove it. So you want to have some kind of a proof, a picture or something on your navigation app that shows when you arrived. Okay, this is the statute that makes the difference. Okay, it's Florida Statute 327.60. And what it basically states, this is what has protected us anchoring, and this is what we fought for back in 2007, 2008. A county or a municipality may not enact, continue in effect, or enforce any ordinance or local regulation, blah, 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 regulating the anchoring of vessels outside the marked boundaries of a mooring field. Okay. In other words, if you can anchor in most places in Florida, provided they are not near a mooring field, or you're not blocking somebody's entrance or access to their dock. So generally, you can anchor most places without a problem. Okay, now where to stop in Florida? I'm just going to go quickly through this. If you have questions, just raise your hands or unmute yourself and say something. In fact, I see we've got a couple comments in chat here. Let's see what we got. Do I know if there's some sort of no? Brian, I don't know if there's a sort of list of ALAs in Florida. In fact, and that's a good idea. We should have a list of those. I've listed offhand the ones that I'm aware of. but there's more and more of them coming on every day. I'm going to make a point of asking about this and seeing if I can get a list of ALAs. And if I can get that, then I'll post it for everybody. Do we have a second question there? We have greetings from Serenity. Hello, Serenity. That would be Aurora. Yes, I thought so. Okay. So where to stop in Florida? One of my favorite stops in Florida, it's the first one, is Fernandina Beach. Fernandina Beach is a tourist town that does not feel like a tourist town. And in Florida, that's a real rarity. You can oftentimes walk into a bar and you'll be sitting beside locals instead of other tourists like yourself. And there's some really great pubs. They have moorings, which are available. You can anchor, and they have dockage, although the dockage has become quite expensive there now. But you have all three options. If you take a mooring or if you choose to anchor out, you can buy a dinghy pass, not a dinghy pass, you can buy a shower pass. You get a shower, you can use the laundry room. The community itself is really nice. It's right off the waterfront. Good shopping, number of really good restaurants. There's a place there that has 2-for-1 margaritas, which is handy to know for those who like margaritas. It's absolutely one of my favorite places in Florida. Next, in terms of Florida, on your way from Florida or from Fernandina to St. Augustine, I forgot to mention this. There is a free dock at Little Sisters Creek, and that's just before the St. Johns River. So it's on your right-hand side. And when you come up to it, you'll be able to see whether there's room there or not. During the season, it gets pretty busy. When you come in, if the current is coming out towards you, it's nice and easy to dock. If the current is coming in, if you've got a flood current, what you have to do is get in there and turn quickly before you get too far down the dock, because what will happen is you'll find yourself running into shoal water. Okay. But there's water on the dock. And if need be, you can get an Uber to take yourself into town. There's a fairly decent restaurant about 3 miles away, which is a bit of a walk, but again, you can get an Uber. So that's Little Sisters Creek. And you can get information on that from the ICW Free Docks Facebook page or icwfreedocks.com. Now your next stop is St. Augustine, very historic city. It's the oldest city in America. They have moorings, a very limited anchorage, and there's a set of moorings over in Salt Run, which is separate from the city. If you're planning on staying for a while and leaving the boat, that's not a bad place to leave it. As I said, there's very limited anchorage possibilities because if it's not mooring, there's just not a lot of space to anchor. It shallows out outside of the mooring field. And there's also dockage, of course. I typically get to St. Augustine and I'll spend at least 3 or 4 days every trip just because it's such a pleasant place to be. Your next stop, your next city of any size will be Daytona. There's not much available from the water in Daytona, unfortunately. But there are a couple of anchorages. There's a variety of marinas with dockage. The one that I will usually go to, I'll go down to just past Halifax Harbor Marina, and I'll anchor out in the off the ICW there. You have to go down past the one red, and then you come back up about half a mile. The good holding, usually there's a number of boats there, and you into Halifax Harbor. They have public docks there for boat launch ramps, and you can tie up your dinghy there if you want to get off and explore a little bit of the town. There's a number of decent restaurants and such that are not too far off. Leaving Daytona, your next stop is Titusville. Titusville has an anchorage. There's dockage and there are moorings. I've never explored Titusville very much. It looks like a nice community. There's a nice old downtown area there. I just have never spent a lot of time there. I usually blow straight through because I'm on my way to Cocoa, which is my really favorite place in Florida. Cocoa, the historic village of Cocoa, is really a fun, friendly, pretty place. You have an anchorage there, of course. There's very limited dockage from the marinas. There's only one dockage in town, or one marina in town, in fact. But they do have a free dock. And the free dock is available for, I believe, 48 hours out of every month. I can't remember offhand what the limit is. But it's a good free dock. It has about 5.5 to 6 feet at the dock. That depends on the time of year because the water there's very little tide. It raises and lowers based on what time of year it is. But Cocoa has got Actually, there's anchorages on 3 of the 4 sides of the bridge, on the northeast, the southeast, and the southwest. The southwest being the side where Coco is. Now, going down the road a little bit further, you have Melbourne, where you have a number of anchorages. You can go off to the left and you can anchor in Dragon Point anchorage. It's called Dragon Point. There used to be a concrete dragon on the point. There's nothing left to it except a little bit of concrete rubble. It's really quite a fascinating looking thing. You'll often see dolphins swimming through that anchorage as well. There's 2 marinas in there if you need fuel. The other anchorage, pardon me, there's one opposite the public library, just bridge. That slowpoke here. One before the bridge. There's also O'Galley, which is a really nice protected anchorage. It's becoming an anchoring limitation area, unfortunately, but they're trying to get rid of the derelict boats. And a lot of the people who have moved in there are less than desirable neighbors, shall we say. Anyway, O'Galley is where I will typically stop when I'm in Melbourne. I know a couple of people in the area. It's always nice to visit. Next going down is Vero Beach. Vero Beach has very limited dockage. They do have mooring balls, and they will typically raft 2 and 3 boats up to a mooring ball during the season. They have a free bus available from the marina, which means that makes it very easy to do any provisioning you have to do to get downtown for shopping and what have you. A lot of people get to Vero Beach and they think, okay, that's it, I'm done. And they'll just park their boat on a mooring ball for the season and stay in Vero Beach till they leave. That's why it's gotten the nickname Velcro Beach. Don't let that happen to you. There's lots more good stuff further down the road. Okay, further down the road, you come to Fort Pierce. I think it's about 12 or 14 miles past Vero Beach. Again, you have several marinas with dockage. You have several anchorages there. And there's also an inlet if you want to get offshore at this point. Fort Pierce is another community I do not know particularly well, but people who've spent the time exploring it tell me it's really quite nice. A number of good restaurants and pubs that are not far from the anchorage areas. Moving on a little further, you come to Stewart. Stewart, you have to get off the ICW for at what's called the Crossroads. The Crossroads has notoriously been shallow, but if you stay between the markers, you'll be fine. So you swing off towards Stewart. You can either go up into what's called Manatee Pocket, which is about 3/4 of a mile up, and then off to the left. They're putting all mooring balls in there now. Unfortunately, they're throwing all the anchored people out, which is unfortunate because that was a really handy anchorage. Or you can go further on into the town of Stewart itself. They have another marina with mooring balls there, and that's right next to downtown. Very, very convenient. It's got a lovely shop, captain's lounge and such. Okay, going past Stewart is another one of my favorite places, Peck Lake. Now, it's not a lake. All it is, it's a wide stretch of the ICW, but you'll see boats anchored there all the time. It's a nice protected anchorage. The only problem is that there's not a no wake zone in the area, and a lot of boats will go flying through there, and you'll get a lot of bounciness on the weekends. But the anchorage is there, and you've got access to the Atlantic beach. So if you want to do any surfing, if you want to just have a swim in the beach, or if you just want to lay out on the sand, this area in June and July will have dozens of sea turtles that'll come up onto the beach at night and dig holes in the sand and lay their eggs. I've taken pictures of a few of them when I walked up there and seen it at night. It's amazing. These huge 5 and 6 and 7 foot long animals crawling up the beach and then digging a hole for themselves into which they lay their eggs. It's something really to watch. Leaving Peck Lake, your next major stop is Palm Beach. Palm Beach has several anchorages. The holding in the one by Peanut Island is terrible. I suggest you not anchor there. But opposite Peanut Island, to the south of it, the south of the inlet, again, you'll find good holding. There's if you go a little further down into town, you'll come across several docks built out. Those are dinghy docks and day docking. There's an anchorage there. It's become quite lively. Really good access to downtown, and the buses come right through. So if you need to do any shopping at the Publix or what have you, you can grab the bus there. Again, this is another inlet that takes you out to the Atlantic. And a lot of people, when they get to Palm Beach, they'll take that inlet and they'll run south offshore to Fort Lauderdale because they don't want to go through the 23 bridges between Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale. Now, the trick to doing that section is you need to be able to power your boat along at 6 3/4 knots. If you can make 6 3/4 knots, you will catch every bridge between Palm Beach and Florida without having to stop and wait. Okay, that's the key to it, 6 3/4 knots. I can see everybody scribbling this down really quickly. The nice thing about the trip between Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale, the homes are amazing. If you have a thing about wealthy homes and attractive homes, it's really, really neat. And if you're going down right before Christmas, which, your timing is probably going to bring you there about Christmas, some of the people really go right off the deep end with Christmas decorations. There's always some fascinating stuff on that section. The only problem with that stretch is that if you go on the weekends, you get a lot of local boaters and small boats, and they go roaring by. They don't give a damn about the wake. They'll rock the heck out of you. You'll bounce all over the place. So I strongly suggest, if you're in Palm Beach on Friday, stay there till Monday and avoid all the stupidity. Okay, leaving Palm Beach, you get to Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale, very, very limited anchorage, very, very limited access to shore. I believe they've closed the mooring field. I haven't heard that they've reopened it at Las Olas. Dockage in town is very expensive. I like Fort Lauderdale, but not as a boater because it's just not convenient. They did have a very good anchorage there, but unfortunately, the city of Fort Lauderdale got it marked off limits. Now, that, of course, has nothing to do with the fact that the Florida senator who got it marked off limits, grew up there, and his father still has a house on that area. That I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. But, I mean, we couldn't expect that sort of thing, could we? Sorry, I'm being cynical here. Anyway, if you want to spend some time in Fort Lauderdale, about the only reasonable anchorage is Lake Sylvia. Now, when you come in Lake Sylvia, watch your charts carefully. It shallows out quite a bit, but you're able to anchor in Lake Sylvia. And then if you want, you can dinghy down one of the canals, which takes you up to a pub, which will allow you to leave your boat, your dinghy there to do any $10. But if you stop to have lunch or drinks at the shop that you're renting the dinghy space from, they just take it off your bill. So moving past the Fort Lauderdale Inlet, you come to a place called Hollywood Beach in Dania. Hollywood Beach had a couple of really, really good anchorages. Over the years, they have become congested with a lot of derelict boats. Hollywood Beach is therefore requested and been granted an anchoring limitation area. As transients, stopping for a couple of nights, this is not going to affect us. Unfortunately, it's impossible to get to shore. You cannot use the boat ramp for your dinghy. They will tow your dinghy away, and you can't go to the seawall, which is along Highway 1, because again, they just don't permit it. So, but all you can do in Hollywood Beach is just anchor and then move on. And this is unfortunate because I've spent as much as 2.5 months in Hollywood Beach. Really, really loved it. Nice place to go, nice boardwalk on the beach, lots of interesting businesses, restaurants. It was one of my favorite spots in my first few years cruising, to stop there. And that's gone now. That's changed. So anyway, you've got Hollywood Beach, North Lake and South Lake to anchor in. They're actually called North Lake and South Lake. Whoop. Okay, what's happening here? Okay. Bear with me, folks. See, there we go. Okay. Once you come south from, okay, now if your mast is any taller than 55 feet, you're going offshore at Fort Lauderdale because there's a bridge between Fort Lauderdale and Miami that is a 55-foot limit. But if you're not offshore, a really, really lovely anchorage in North Miami is called Oleta Park. Now, you have to be careful about how you get in there. It's not marked. If anybody decides to go there, you can get a hold of me and I'll give you the directions. But there are several really, really nice anchorages off of some of the small islands. The only problem with Oleta Park, it's very popular with the locals and it can get incredibly noisy on the weekends. How do I phrase this? I try not to spend personally trying to spend too much time in Miami because the local boating population is the kindest thing I can say about them is they're obnoxious. They have no consideration for the fellow boaters, and they will carry on with loud music until 2:30, 3, and 4 in the morning. And if loud music bothers you, if rowdy boaters bother you, this is not a place to spend any time. Now, moving further on into Miami, I know I'm the kind of guy who sits on his front lawn and yells, "Get off of my lawn!" Okay, Coconut Grove has some. It's a very nice spot in Miami. It has some beautiful moorings. They actually do offer the moorings available to the public. So if you're looking for a nice place to stay in Miami for a while, Coconut Grove is what I would recommend. Just outside of Coconut Grove is Dinner Key Anchorage, which is the big mooring field. They have moorings and they have a water taxi. The only problem with Dinner Key Anchorage, in my opinion, is that it's too open, and almost any wind that comes through is going to give you a very bouncy ride on your mooring ball. I've only stayed in there once or twice, and I wouldn't stay there again for that reason. And the last anchorage that I'll mention in Miami is No Name Harbor. No Name Harbor is on Key Biscayne. There's an anchorage there. There's also a seawall, which is restricted to day use. Extremely protected, but again, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday afternoon, extremely noisy. Okay. People like to come there and you get 6 different boats playing 8 different loud stereos. It can be obnoxious on the weekends, to say the least. So there you are. You can also anchor outside of No Name Harbor, although again, you get a lot of, especially the big sport fish coming through there going fishing, and it can get really rolly. So that's it for the moment. Do we have any questions, folks? There we go. Hello, do we have any questions? Raise your hand or just unmute and speak up. Don't be shy. You know what? Thinking of that, I will go in one thing into the Bahamas thing. When you're crossing to the Bahamas, depends on where you're going. If you're going to West End, which is, of course, the Abacos, you could cross from Palm Beach, okay? But the problem is on a sailboat is that the Gulf Stream is going to grab you and push you north, which means that at some point you're going to be crabbing into the Gulf Stream and slowing yourself down. If you're going to the Abacos, go south to Fort Lauderdale and go out of the Fort Lauderdale Inlet. Now, it adds about 25 miles to the trip, which is 49 or 50 miles. So it's going to make the trip a little closer to 70. But because you've got the Gulf Stream behind you, you're going to get a more comfortable ride, and you're going to be getting about 2 knots more speed, which means it's going to take you no longer to do it, but it's going to make your trip much more easily. Now, if you're going to Bimini instead, most people go to Bimini from crossing from Miami. Usually the cut at the government cut, or not government cut, but the channel at south of Biscayne Key, and they'll stay at No Name Harbor, where I would stay, and then they would come out there. Again, what happens is that you're going to be crossing almost straight east to Bimini, which means the Gulf Stream is going to be pushing you north. The way to do it and make it easiest on yourself is sail down to Rodriguez Key. It's about 20 some miles south of No Name Harbor. Anchor out at not Rodriguez Key, Angelfish Key, sorry, or Angelfish Creek. Anchor out at Angelfish Creek. Okay, I'll get that right. And you can also, if you don't draw more than, say, 6 feet, you can also come in on the ICW and then run through Angelfish Creek. Anyway, leave from Angelfish Creek, and again, you're going to run about 20 to 25 miles extra getting to Bimini. But because you're running with the Gulf Stream, again, you've got that much more speed. You don't have the Gulf Stream slamming at your side and making it a rocky, rough ride. It's just more pleasant, and it's equally as fast because you're making the extra speed. Now, when you enter the Bahamas, if you're clearing at Bimini, you can anchor up. You can take a slip at the government dock. There are 3 places to clear in. You can clear in at right downtown by the Big American Game Club. You can clear in at the casino, which is at the far end. Or alternatively, if you come straight in, and instead of turning up into Alistown, if you go straight into the marina that's in front of you from the inlet through the reef, there's a a place to clear in at the airport, and that's in Bimini. Now, if you're clearing in at Abaco, if you're coming into the Abacos, you can clear in at West End if you want, or you can anchor out at West End and you can carry on and then clear in at Treasure Key, Spanish Key, Green Turtle Key, or Marsh Harbor. So you've got lots of options there. Now, technically, the minute you put your anchor down, that's when you're supposed to clear in. So if you stop at West End, you're supposed to clear in at West End. But there are people who don't do that for whatever reason their preferences are. So that's basically how you cross. Remember, go south. And the other thing to remember is don't cross the Gulf Stream in a strong north wind. What happens is that the wind blowing against the current starts to heap the waves up. And I should, one of these days, I'm going to have to record a Gulf Stream forecast from the Weather Channel on the VHF when they're talking about the heights of the seas, because they'll often be 8, 10, 15-foot seas. And we're talking not nice, easy, calm ones. We're talking like straight up, straight down type things. So that's not something you want to do. It's not a fun way to cross. Again, if there's any questions, folks, I'm always available by PM on Messenger. Give me a shout if you need any help or assistance. We still have 1 or 2 spots left in the Sail to the Sun ICW rally, which is leaving from Hampton on October the 21st. It's a 2-month ride down to Miami. It's been called a 2-month-long floating party, and I'm quite proud of that if you want to know the truth. We have a good time, and it's a nice, safe, comfortable time getting south with friends. Okay, folks, thanks very much for joining me tonight. This will be online, recorded and online in a couple of hours. I wish you luck on your trip south. I'm always available if you have a question to ask or if you need any assistance or advice. And I thank you for joining me. Good night, all.